Good morning, evening, afternoon, wherever it is that you are in the world today. Thank you for joining us. I'm so delighted to introduce Banu Joy Harrison. She's going to be speaking with us today about creating an ethical practice. We have created time for Q&A today during the webinar. If you have any clarifying questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. But if you have a general question, hold it until Q&A time. And when that time comes, you can raise your virtual hand or you can put it in the chat and we'll be happy to get to that for you. Just a quick reminder, we do have closed captioning available. You can turn that on if you would like. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Banu. Thank you for joining us today.
All right, thank you. So this is the fourth out of 4 ethics webinars. So I'm sure that some of you have been on previous ones. It's good to see so many folks here today. And there are many that will be looking at this later. So I am thrilled that you have such a deep interest in ethics. So I always like to start with an arriving practice, because no matter where you are, if you're listening to this recording later, or if you're here live, we've all come from our day. And so let's just take a moment to find our feet, maybe take a few deep breaths. And just say hi to your body. Check in. How is your wonderful body doing today? Letting your body feel the support of the surface beneath you, your chair, maybe you have a backrest. And just settling into your body. When we can be in our ventral vagal system and be more embodied, we actually learn better and we have greater attention. And so this is always a nice practice to arrive together. So thank you very much for landing here with me today. I am sitting in Albuquerque, New Mexico on Pueblo lands, and we're actually having a rainy day, so it's kind of cozy and nice. And like Carolyn said, the chat will be open. I don't want a lot of crosstalk happening on the chat, but I like to go back and forth between my PowerPoint and questions. And for those of you that may be new to the ethics and to me teaching, I am a clinical social worker in Albuquerque. I graduated in '94 with my MSW. I've done SE for 21, 22 years now. I took the training in the early 2000s. I did a ton of assisting with Maggie Klein and Kathy Kane, and I was at many advanced trainings where Peter was still teaching the advanced trainings. This is the beauty of somatic experiencing, right? It's a very, very broad range of fields that can practice SE, and that kind of complicates, the ethical piece, right? Because everyone has a different scope of practice, and we talked about that in a previous ethics workshop. So all these ethics webinars will be posted on the SE website under the ethics. So you can listen to them again and again if you have a question or whatever. And okay, if there are any questions before I jump onto my PowerPoint. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so this is creating an ethical practice today. And so all four of these, we did one kind of a general one about what the new ethics code is. And then we did a multiple roles ethics webinar and a scope of practice webinar. And then this is creating an ethical practice. So this practice piece is a little unusual because the ethics code as it stands right now does not cover private practice work. So the SEI International Code of Ethics is geared for trainings and workshops. And yet, for me, this is where the rubber hits the road, is in our private practice work, our group work, however you're using SE. This is where we need to really embody ethics as opposed to just the training. So what I'm doing today is I'm going to be pulling from ethical practices and giving concrete information about how you can bring ethics into your work. So if you are licensed, many of you are licensed as therapists, and you will have to abide by an ethical code from your state board licensure as well as your professional organization if you are a member of that. For example, I'm a social worker, I'm licensed in the state. The state has a code of ethics for social workers, and I'm an NASW, National Association of Social Worker member, and that also has an ethical code. If you are a coach, there are coach guidelines. If you're a yoga teacher, there are yoga guidelines. And if you want to know more, you can start to search codes just to see if you're unsure about best practices for your work. So the SEI Code of Ethics is on the SE webinar, or on the website. So it's always good to refresh your memory with that periodically. So because we are working with trauma, the first thing is safety. And I love this graphic because the fish is actually safe for the moment, but it may not feel safe, even though it's contained and it's in its water, and the cat is outside of the fish bowl. But the fish may not feel 100% safe with the way the cat is gazing upon it. So we have to really weave in ethics to our day-to-day operations of our work with clients. And it's so important because that will help protect our clients. It protects us. It gives some guidance and framework to create safety. So today we're going to be talking about all of these things. We're going to do the boring stuff of paperwork and logistics, financial agreements, the language that we use, establishing and maintaining appropriate boundaries, multiple relationships. I will just touch on ever so briefly because I did a whole webinar, number 2 on that, and the scope of practice. Number 3, we'll be talking a little bit about guidelines around touch, and then repairing mistakes because we are all human and we will all be, we're going to make mistakes, right? And repair is an important piece of creating safety. So as I've said before, Deb Dana has highlighted this so eloquently in bringing polyvagal theory, she makes it very practical. All nervous systems need 3 things to feel safe. So we need context, choice, and connection. Context, choice, and connection. So we're going to be, ethics needs to embody all of those pieces. And that will create safety by offering predictability, clarity, honesty. If clients know how to schedule appointments and what your policies are if they need to miss, and if you are consistent and steady and you enforce them evenly across the board, that gives a very powerful container where your clients with trauma know what's going to happen, right? It makes it clear. There's less ambiguity, and so that increases safety. And so, when all of those pieces are in place, both us as practitioners and clients don't need to worry about those details. So paperwork and logistics. So what I'll do is we'll be talking about this, and then I'll come back off and see if there's any questions about this particular realm of creating an ethical practice. So paperwork and logistics, intake and consent forms. So no matter how you are practicing, I think it's very important to have some intake and consent forms for consent for treatment. And I know that those of you that are clinicians, licensed clinicians, that is an established part of what you do, that we always need to have a signed consent form so that we can practice that the client is agreeing and stating they're agreeing to getting treatment. And the intake form is, everyone may create their own intake form depending on their scope of practice and what they're working on. And I had a really interesting experience with that one way back in the early 2000s when I was starting my SE practice as a social worker. And so I created my form, and it was very long. It was too long, my intake. And that was the days before digitized intake forms. And one of the questions that I had on there was, please list any experiences that you consider difficult or overwhelming or traumatic. Because I thought, well, this will kind of give me some areas of where we may need to focus, like, have they had car accidents or medical procedures or, developmental trauma? And the most common response to that question of list any experiences that you consider overwhelming, the most common statement was nothing out of the ordinary. And it really stumped me. And so I would ask people, what do you mean nothing out of the ordinary? And, clients would say, well, my parents divorced when I was a kid. I'm going through a divorce now. I've been in 2 car accidents, had 1 surgery. I don't know. That's ordinary stuff. Right. And so I took that question out because it wasn't helpful at all. So, get feedback about your forms from, family or other clinicians. Am I leaving anything out? Sometimes it can be very difficult for new clients to divulge too much on an intake form. Other clients find it easier to write about things instead of speaking about things. So it can be hard to strike a balance, but usually I find that I've shortened my intake considerably and find that I get better and more information when we have that thing called connection, right? When we're face to face and when we can talk about things, then I can take in more information and they can share hopefully a little bit more freely. For those of you that are, yoga therapists or body workers using SE, in these consent forms, there can be statements about this treatment that you're getting is non-sexual in nature. And that provides a very clear and contained. As a social worker, I don't have that in my intake forms, but when there is any kind of touch therapy, movement kind of work where you may be doing corrections or, having touch, it can be clarifying and helpful to have the clients acknowledge that what you're offering is strictly therapeutic and non-sexual. And that provides a very explicit boundary there that is really helpful. So this consent form can have your policies in it. It can have, your cancellation policy if you do a charge for missed appointments, if it's less than 24 hours notice. You can have your confidentiality information in there. You can have emergency contacts, which I would highly recommend that you have someone, name and phone number that you can call if your client starts to have a deregulating experience and maybe doesn't feel like they can drive, or where you need to create a little more safety through having an outside contact. And then I always have clients sign and date and agree to all of my policies. I also provide them information of that they can always ask questions, that they can opt out of any kind of touch work. And when I started doing more SE in my social work practice, I actually created a separate somatic experiencing consent form. And in that consent form, I had just information. What is somatic experiencing? What does a typical session look like? How do we begin to engage the body in talking about trauma, and that somatic experiencing is experiential in nature, and that, I may be asking them to turn their attention inwards and report back what they're noticing, and that again, these experiential pieces of the work are always by choice, right? They can always end it if it's not comfortable. We can talk about it. And we can certainly still work together with that. So that is one of the things that I have added on, as I do SE work, is to have a very specific, yes, the slide, well, I guess I could send the slides, but the whole PowerPoint will be on the website for SE, so you can always access them. And in terms of examples of forms, I don't know if, I would have to ask. I'm not sure if there is a SEI sample form. So maybe Abby or Carolyn, you can, there isn't. Okay. So, all right, well, and again, I think because there's so many different professions, these kind of forms will be variable. So one thing you might, okay, I will try to I'll send the PowerPoint to SEI, and because I don't have access to any of your emails, and then you can get that. So, okay. So what I suggest is, if you have any colleagues that are in the same field as you, to see if they have a consent form that you can look at and then adapt to your own. So that is just intake and consent forms. I think they're a very important part of an ethical practice. Financial clarity. So this is also very important, because money is a very, very powerful force. And so in writing and verbally, it's important to share what your fees are, what your late cancellation policy is, how that's paid, how you take payments. For many clinicians, you probably take insurance, and so you need different information for billing insurance. And then, you decide if there's any kind of sliding scale or pro bono arrangements. And, when the payment is due, I have always had payment due at the time of the service. I don't do monthly invoicing for clients. I get payment on the day that we have our session. The whole question of sliding scale or pro bono is one that you have to individually decide, right? I always have some clients that are on a sliding scale, because I want to make my services available to people. And usually I ask clients to keep those arrangements private, because depending on the person, the sliding scale is going to be variable. So because I'm in private practice and I don't work for an agency, I have to manage all of that on my own. If you work for an agency, doing your SE work, oftentimes the agency will have their own policies about that, and you don't have to worry about that. So again, much confusion can happen over finances and payment, and it's really important to clarify that upfront. Time and scheduling. So starting and ending sessions on time. This is so important to reduce confusion and ambiguity and not knowing what's going to happen. And, I have found that if I go over on a session, out of the generosity of my heart without telling the client, that may put them in a stressful situation because they may need to be somewhere right after the session. And so that's always something that's negotiated, right? Is, you're still kind of in process here. I don't have a client right after. Do you have time for an extra 5 minutes so that you can settle and, leave in a more balanced state, right? And sometimes they say no because they might have to pick up a child at school or be somewhere if you're seeing people in person. So it provides, being on time provides a very powerful framework and structure of clients know, okay, we have this left. And for many clients, I will, at about 10 or 15 minutes before the end of the session, I'll say, we have about 10 minutes left. And even if they are kind of deeper in an experiential process, that gives their body, mind information that, oh, we're going to need to end soon. And so again, I provide kind of like a little heads up to clients that we will be ending in 10 minutes, and that helps them, work with whatever process is going so that they can be ready to go out the door. So I want to just come off my share here and see if there are any questions. So thank you, Carolyn. Yes. So any questions about these kind of logistical things? It seems kind of burdensome, and most clinicians don't like the paperwork side of things. Any questions, comments about these tools? So the question is it normal to withhold the first session or scheduling until after consent forms are in hand? I haven't. I guess this could be a personal decision. When I used to see people in person, they would call, we'd schedule, and they would fill out the forms when they arrived with all of that information. So it was right in the moment. When I am now doing online, I do basically telehealth all the time. And so I will email the forms to people, and then they send them back to me ahead of time. And so that works out really well. And yes, Jess, just front loading all the expectations is very helpful. Yes, so Hannah has a great logistical question. Can you talk about how you organize paperwork and keep it stored? Do you keep client paperwork forever or discard it after X amount of years? So I am personally keeping everything. Each state has their own regulations for tax purposes, for sessions, for finances. It's I think you can be audited within a 3-year period, but if they find an error, then they can go back auditing for 7 years with the IRS. And so you certainly want to keep receipts and documentation of sessions and payments and expenses for at least 7 years. For client paperwork, because you're working with trauma, I keep my client documentation, my record of notes of sessions. I've kept all of it, and I've been in work over 20 years. Yeah, so I think if we can be really clear and have really good boundaries with all the paperwork thing, it feels organized to clients so they can settle, right? Instead of being a little sloppy with paperwork. So Nicole, you can unmute. I see your hand.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having this webinar. This is awesome. I'm curious if you know any resources that are HIPAA compliant to link in forms to our websites.
Ooh. You mean so that the clients would be sending forms with their information to your website?
Or through the website, and then somehow it can like get emailed to us and we could file it that way without the actual physical paper.
That's a really good question. I am not great with tech. So the platform that I use for my telehealth sessions is doxy.me, which is a HIPAA compliant platform. And I still use the free version, but I think if you pay, there may be options for that kind of thing. So, yeah, that's a really good question that I don't have. I still do paper notes. I know a lot of people are now doing computer, if you have like a therapy note program that you use for your billing and for your notations. So someone put in the chat, Hushmail is evidently, is that hopefully, Lindsay, that's HIPAA compliant. So Bree has a question. What's an appropriate amount of detail for case notes? As a therapist, we're instructed to only add facts that are vague. I find with SE and noticing patterns, there's more interpretation. How does that reflect in the notes? So again, this is going to be really variable depending on if you're, let's say, doing a one-on-one yoga therapy session versus if you're a social worker or a psychologist. It's going to be different. If you're a massage therapist, it's going to be different. So insurance companies don't pay for somatic experiencing work. They don't know what it is. They don't understand it. So I have always erred on the side of, for my progress notes that the insurance companies can have access to, I do minimum necessary information. So I basically I do a DAP note, DAP description, which is the client's reporting of how they're doing, my assessment, and then that's the A, and then the P stands for what's my plan. It's called a DAP note. Some more hands-on people might use SOAP notes, which is subjective, objective. So subjective, what's the client reporting? Objective, what are my findings? Assessment is the A, and then P is the plan. I keep, sort of side notes about SE sessions. I also do EMDR. So, in those notes, I might say, client had good release through minor shaking and sweating, right? Because not everyone has a discharge through that. Or, a client has overcoupling with anxiety and breathing patterns. If I put that in my notes, that goes to the insurance company, they don't really know what to do with that. So I basically say I'm doing kind of behavioral work with clients, or I might say I'm doing trauma work and have the focus of attention of we're working on this particular traumatic event, using trauma therapies, working with anxiety and how that relates to body sensations. I might report that the client has, pain conditions that seem to be exacerbated when triggering happens, but I don't put in like a lot of the I write that separate for myself for the patterns, because I find it useful for me to check in with the clients of, wow, so what did you notice? You had a really big discharge in this one session, and what happened the day after, or how did that integrate into your system, which I then wouldn't put in notes. Okay, so the Hushmail is HIPAA compliant. Thank you, Lindsay. Tanya has a question. Are non-regulated SEPs required to keep notes? So I'm assuming maybe you're a coach or like SEPs are not regulated anywhere, actually. It's not like it's not a profession. So here's just one thing that I will say about note taking. The client is perceiving you as a trained professional in trauma resolution therapy. And that will be deeply coupled with healthcare, right? In their mind, you're a professional, you are working with trauma, there's physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual components to trauma work. And for your own protection, please have notes, right? That is best practice as a trauma therapist, because if, the fact that you're non-regulated means that there's no licensing board that will say, hey, there's been a complaint about you. But if a client does complain, they can complain to the Better Business Bureau or Chamber of Commerce or, business things that they may be, disgruntled with your services. And if you don't have any documentation, that is like a strike against you in a really deep way. It's like you are doing trauma work and you don't even take notes. Like, what kind of therapist are you? Right? So I highly recommend massage therapists, yoga therapists. Now, if you're teaching a yoga class that is trauma informed and you're bringing in SE trauma informed principles, that is a different kind of setting, right, for group work. So I teach a lot of mindfulness classes. I don't take detailed notes on what people share, but I do make a few notes, right? And yes, Laura, you're right. Liability insurance can cover you. You have to check on whatever your particular licensing. So for non-regulated, non-licensed practitioners, it can be challenging to find malpractice insurance or liability insurance. I don't have any there. You can get some through Yoga Alliance, I think. If anyone has any info you can throw in the chat about malpractice insurances for non-licensed practitioners, that would be helpful. But yes, I think best practice is make notations at the time of your sessions. The client may even say, so what were we working on, 3 sessions ago? Like, I'm kind of going into my dissociation and freeze. Like, I can't remember what our sessions are about. And if you don't have any notes, I mean, my memory is not that good. So to remember details, so take notes. So any other questions? These are great questions. So anybody else before we move on? Okay, I will jump back on my screen. Okay, so written, spoken, and nonverbal language. So we have a lot of communication, right? This is the context part of the 3 C's of safety, right? We have, context, choice, and connection. So we offer a lot of context through our documentation, right? Consent forms, all the things that maybe you have a flyer about your practice, your online website information about who you are and what you do, and the pictures that you use. All of that communicates so much about you and about the work that you do. So it's really important to have people review what you're writing about yourself on your website, any forms that you have, any advertising kinds of things that you do, your voice message on your phone. All of these things are really, really important and convey a message. So in this picture, there's a yoga therapist, helping stretch out the sacrum and the lower back of their client. One would hope, I would hope, that the therapist has received spoken or written consent to touch and to do this kind of pressure on the low back of their client. Right? If touch is not negotiated, and we're going to talk a little bit more about touch, if touch is not negotiated, it can be surprising. It can feel like it's a boundary crossing or violation. And even a hug, do you give your clients a hug at the end of the session? That needs to be negotiated because it's not part of touch. It's, even if you do SE touch work, the hug part is a whole different thing. And that's really important for that to be negotiated. So what do you want to communicate, right? To your clients, to the world, even your logo communicates something about who you are and what you do. Is your voice prosodic and kind on your voice and your, voice message, right? That ties in with Porges's ventral vagal prosodic work, right? Are you really busy when you're recording your message? And is it, hi, you've reached my office, please leave a message. I'll get back to you within 24 hours. Have a great day. Bye. Is going to communicate something. And so what do you want your clients to hear? Right? What do you want them to see on your website? All of this accesses the sensory input of who we are into the client's nervous system. It's very important for all of that. And then, if you do in-person work or even, what your background looks like, how you speak with clients, the dress that you have, your office setup, it communicates our understanding of culture, of the power of the therapeutic connection, of the power differential, and even, what is our position on race and ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, socioeconomics, religion, disability, right? How accessible are you in all of these areas? How do you, if someone is non-binary, do you use the proper pronouns? Do you, if someone has trauma that is a person of color, or, do you bring in the larger systemic piece of trauma issues, right? So all of these things communicate so very, very much about who we are, our approach, how we educate clients. All of those things are just so, so vital with creating safety. So again, I'm gonna pop off here and see if there's any questions. Yeah, so Andrea is saying, I found it important to create a consistent and homey background when she's on client calls. When the background is plain or cold, it changes the energy. Yeah, I would agree. And I find it a little difficult visually when someone has the blurred background or the, putting a picture, because their body kind of morphs when they move out of the center of focus. I can deal with it, but if anyone has any visual trauma, right? I have a woman I'm working with who has been in several car accidents, and her eyes, as we're doing the work, her eyes get cloudy, they get unfocused, they get all of this. And I wouldn't want my Zoom background, with those virtual backgrounds, to contribute to that instability she feels when her visual field gets wonky, right, as we do work. So So we do have to pay attention to all of these sensory components. If you're in person, you may love essential oils or incense or candles that are scented. And for many people, that is very difficult. We all know that, from our training, that for some people, trauma really affects the physiology and they become very, very sensitive to smells, fragrances, oils, even markers. I was working with a woman that had extreme environmental sensitivity, lots of trauma. When she first came into my room, I hadn't even brought it out, but she could smell the whiteboard markers from my previous client. Right. And that was a trigger for her. And she said, I can't be in this room now. And she was like, I felt terrible, right? Because I wasn't aware of how sensitive she was. And so I ended up doing house calls on her because she could control her environment more. Now in the age, this was way before Zoom came on. So Tanya's saying that she's very sound sensitive and not able to settle if the Zoom sound quality is poor. Yeah. So these are all really important pieces of what we're communicating. And again, my intention always is, how can I create an environment where when the client enters, they can feel settled, where they can feel safe, where they can feel like it's homey, where we can have a connection, where, I want to minimize any other possible triggerings, if need be. If you're in person, do you have like some music going on in your waiting room? And is that music, helpful or not? I had an experience way back when I was a massage therapist, and I had those of you of my age will remember this. I had a Windham Hill solo piano by Peter Cater. So some of you may be familiar with that. And this new client asked if I had any other music, for the massage therapy. And I said, sure, what would you like? And so she changed to some classical music. And then she said, do you want to know why I wanted the music changed? And I go, well, you can tell me if you want to. I don't need to know. And she told me that that music was music of the devil, because that kind of like new age music made you relax. And that's when the devil could come in. And so that is not my orientation, but my intention is to create a safe space. I did not know that. It was very diagnostic for me. It was like, what was I not going to do in my massage session? I wasn't going to get her too relaxed, right? Because that would be dangerous for her. So it was very helpful, even though, she had a very different view than I do, but I needed to have choice, right? And to offer choice. And so I acknowledged her for taking care of herself, right? And for clarifying what she needed and asking for it and then receiving it. So we often don't know what might be a trigger for somebody else. And so inviting the conversation, if anything, doesn't feel comfortable. I have clients I work with chronic migraine. And so I used to have to get a shade on my window when I was in person because the window was too bright, right? So having the capacity to modulate your environment, right? Not having a desk between you and the client, because a desk makes it feel colder and more distant, but hopefully negotiating space with your client. Do you need the chair back a little bit more? Am I too far away? Do you need it closer? Do you want to turn away from me for a bit? Do you feel too visible? All of those things are just really, really important. Okay, any other questions kind of on communication? So Nicole, what a beautiful question. I'm curious if clients feel more safe with Zoom calls versus in person. Has this affected building trust and rapport with a client or helping with clients? So beautiful question. I have had it mixed. So I have one client that is, probably would be diagnosed with Asperger's. They don't really have that in the DSM anymore, but she is definitely on the spectrum. And we do phone calls because she can't do Zoom because she feels too highlighted. She's too vulnerable, right? And she used to come in person for years and years. And it could be hard for her. Sometimes she would have to turn away, turn her back to me. So that she was sort of more on the extreme where she really likes the phone sessions. So she talks more and is much more engaged on the phone. Most of my clients feel okay. Some clients like, oh, I really wish that we were in person. I just gave up my office. I've had a private practice office since 1984, and I just gave it up last year. So we're experimenting with this. And so mostly clients are like, okay, if this is the only way I can see you, then I will do that. And yes, eye contact can be difficult. I encourage some people to fidget, draw, or walk, whatever helps them remain grounded. Yep, that's beautiful. I personally miss the visual cues when I'm just talking with someone, because so much of the SE and the body work, that we do is what's happening in the body, and is their foot twitching a little bit, and I can't see that if it's just a phone. I can't see it if it's on Zoom either, but I might notice that there's a little movement, and I might ask, what's happening in your legs right now? I think it's going to be very individualized. So Cynthia is saying, I feel safest on phone in my personal sessions as well. I experience it completely different when being watched and not my authentic self, less ability to focus on myself. So it's fascinating, right? The physical presence of the other can feel a little threatening, like, oh, I'm really being watched. It's hard to close my eyes knowing my therapist is staring at me. And then other people will feel less connected on Zoom, right? So it's going to be, yeah, we all have different needs. And now, fortunately, there's maybe more options because of the online. And so sometimes when I'm on Zoom with sessions, if the client seems a little hesitant to have their camera on, I said, I can guide you through this with your camera off. It helps me to see cues, but if you would prefer to have your camera off as we do this experiential piece, you're welcome to do that. Or sometimes I'll just have the person turn around to their back. Yeah. And Laura's saying that they're finding themselves relying on tracking micro movements because of the telehealth, right? We have to get much more discerning of what we're picking up in the cues. So we're developing new skills, right? So that's great. Yeah. I love this kind of conversation. This is why I teach. I love this interaction. So I agree. It's helpful for all of us. Okay, I'm going to jump back onto my next slide. Oh, before I go back, I just wanted to say one thing: how we educate people about the process of SE. So I used to have a flyer about SE, and it was like one of those trifold flyers. And what I found is that you want to give a bit of information, but not so much information that it scares them, right? I remember when I was teaching at a massage school, I would have the students create a flyer for their massage business. And one student, had all the benefits of massage therapy and then what you might experience. And she went into all of these kind of more acute, intense reactions. After a session, you might have temperature dysregulation, you might vomit, you might feel nauseous, you might have the runs, you might have cramping. And it was like, no one's gonna, that's too much, right? TMI, too much information. So this is, we don't want to overwhelm our clients even before we've started to work with them with too much information, right? So we need to titrate the information we give about what SE is and what the process is. And I usually find that, definitely doing at least one experiential exercise in the first session is really important. Doing some orienting can be, right when they come in the room, have them look around where they are. We orient in the Zoom room. I have them look for an object of beauty or interest in their own home environment or in my office, just as a way of, arriving together, coming into relation, coming back into the body. So titrate the information. Digital presence. Okay, so the quotes on the left side of the screen, I'll read them, but I took this off of a Facebook group. It's kind of a personal session SE sharing group. It's not a site that is monitored by SEI. And it always just sort of surprises me about the questions that come up. So in this first one, I've been on Lexapro since 2013, and I have no idea what it does for me. I've just stayed on the medication because I'm scared of tapering. I've definitely progressed to having a lot more good days than bad, whereas it used to be opposite. I'm doing SE work and feeling some stabilization. Again, not really sure what impact the meds had in this, if any. Should I taper off meds? That is a loaded question. And surprisingly, people respond. And these are maybe people that are part of the group. They may not be clinicians at all. They're just giving their personal experience. Oh, I was on this and I tapered and it was good, or it was bad, or it was awful, or it was this. And people will follow what other sharers say. Well, maybe I'll go off too, and so if you, for one thing, it's kind of like, why is this person not communicating to their practitioner about this question? Right? This is a practitioner question. And many of us, medication is not in my scope of practice. I cannot tell someone to either go on or go off medication. I might make a suggestion that medications might be stabilizing for you. Talk with your doctor, or, if you can, get into, a psychiatrist, which is pretty rare to get in any kind of quick way. The second quote that I have here, also from that same site, is, "Hi, I'm unsure about what's going on. If you can help me understand. I've been doing SE for a few months. I thought I was getting better, but I started to feel better, including being less triggered. Now I feel like I'm back into some deep stuff, which makes me think I'm getting worse, or that SE isn't helping." Again, I know that they're seeking support from a group of people that do private, that have sessions, lay people that are getting SE work. But again, this should be a question for their practitioner, right? I mean, we all know about the trajectory of trauma healing. Things get better, they get more stabilized, then we go deeper into the vortex and things get maybe more unsettled, and we have to work maybe more titrated, more pendulation, maybe more lateral movements. And that needs to be explained to the clients rather than having them go on social media to try to get answers. So with digital presence, what kind of digital presence do you have? Or do you just have your website? Are you on Instagram? Are you on Facebook or TikTok? Or, do you, would you respond to posts like this as a clinician? If you do, there is some liability, right? Because if you are a clinician that's licensed and you're making a suggestion, do you even know this client? You don't even know the client, right? It is just from a post. And so I personally would not make a comment or give a suggestion to either of these people about these issues. Just because I don't think that is this. I might make a comment of, I hope you're asking your SE practitioner about these questions. But what type of content do you share if you're on different sites? Are you inspirational? Do you have marketing for classes or workshops or for your therapy practice? Do you answer common questions about trauma? Are you highlighting some little skills like orienting or grounding in your Instagram or things like that? And then considerations is, are you keeping personal and business separate? We all know that some clients really want to be your friends, which is a dual relationship. And if your Instagram is also has family pictures and personal trips and things like that, do you want your clients to see that? I don't. Are you staying in scope of practice with your comments, with your postings, with whatever you have online? Do you give advice in Facebook groups? Do you, what is that all about? Because we don't know, people can join a Facebook group from all over the world. We don't know what's happening. We don't know their personal safety levels. We don't know if they're in a war zone or a earthquake zone, and what kind of suggestions we're giving. It requires deep thought. I know there's a lot of people out there that are posting about trauma, giving skills, giving nervous system information, and it can be very, very helpful, right? And it can drive clients to your website. It can increase your business. So I get that. It's hard to market yourself, but again, what is be really thoughtful, be really mindful. So I want to come off the screen again. So, all right, let me catch up on my quotes here. So Hannah had a question: how do clients respond if you're taking sessions while traveling and not in the normal room? I assume communicating is crucial. Yes. So if I have to be in a different location, I will say, and next week I'm on the road and I'm going to be broadcasting from a hotel room or from a different space. And so just be aware of that. Yeah. So here's Andrea saying, she will say, I'll be in a different room for our session. I wanted to let you know I'll be fully present, just like I always am. Let me know if you have any concerns. Beautiful. Yeah. So Charlotte is saying, do you do free consultations? And if so, do you do experiential SE work during these? Are there any resources on how to provide a safe and effective consultation for prospective clients? So maybe someone else can speak to this. I have never offered free consults to clients. So yeah, I don't know. I know some people do this. I do think to do a very simple experiential work that may not be too triggering for a client would be just some body awareness of, can you feel the support of your chair? Do you have sensations with your backrest? Can you wiggle your feet in your shoes? Or maybe even, just check in with your body and notice one sensation that is neutral to pleasant right now. Right? And that way, a neutral to pleasant sensation can, again, not throw them into the trauma vortex, right? Because they may be a little nervous. They may be like, oh, I'm trying to finally address this trauma. And, oh, what's a pleasant sensation? Oh, okay. Yeah. So, so Laura is saying that they offer 15-minute free initial phone consults, which helps greatly for obtaining clients and client flow, but nothing too deep or intense. Absolutely. Yeah. And Laura also says, with the digital information, you lay yourself open to things backfiring on public forums, no privacy, no safety for you or for the questioner. I agree. I mean, we also have to look at HIPAA and confidentiality about medical issues. So those posts on the previous slide, I mean, one person saying they're taking Lexapro, and that is protected health information that they have now divulged. But if I respond to that, that's kind of on me, right? Like an individual can say whatever they want, but for me, and I'm not even their therapist, and so it gets dicey. And there can be backlash from other people on the site that comment on your suggestions, and then people look you up, and then they're, oh, you're licensed, and oh, I don't think this is appropriate, and oh, I think I'll write to your board. So I don't think it's the best venue for clinical questions, for sure. Information, yes, can be good, that kind of thing. So I don't know, Charlotte, if there's any resources on how to provide a safe and effective consultation. I think, what's important, and here's just a little thing, years ago, there was a study done about what makes the most effective counselor or therapist. Is it the modality? Is it the gender? Is it the personality? Is it, that kind of the approach? Is it psychodynamic or cognitive or behavioral? What's the most important? And what most of the clients that took this survey said, the most important thing was to have an experience together, right? To have felt something happen in the session. That's what made the session valuable. And so I would include, if you're doing a 15-minute consultation, just a very gentle resourcing experience, a gentle noting of a body sensation that is neutral to positive. Laura, you're shaking your head, I can see. I can't hear you. Did you want to
unmute? Yeah, I'm sorry to be so verbose, but I have a lot of emergency room psych experience. So I know how to go in deep and get out. But once you get them, it's hard enough just to see if it's a good fit in 15 minutes on the phone and to know how to say goodbye. You will get drawn in. It's a pit of snakes. I wouldn't go there, not even in a free consult. Information, don't give you really want to do like a drive-by for all intents and purposes. You just want to, and I usually say, okay, this is to see if we're a good fit. I usually use that term. I tend to individualize and mishmash all kinds of techniques together.
Right.
So, and I let them know I don't ask about trauma. I tell them a little bit about yourself. What are you looking for?
Yeah.
And I'll tell them what I can offer them and get out of there. Because it's more marketing, but also in my tone of voice,
Yes.
if you know how to engage.
Yes.
And you will, you'll know if they're a good fit for you too.
Right.
You need to be selective.
And it's that ventral vagal connection that allows the client to feel safe, where they might say, oh, this person feels really good. Yeah. So thank you for your viewpoint on that. And 15 minutes goes by really fast. It's really short, and you don't want to be pulled into 30 minutes, right? Because then that is time that is free. So Nicole has a question. Is it recommended that we share our own stories with clients to build relationship and break down the power plays in the container? So again, I don't know what your therapeutic, what your role is, if you're a licensed clinician or a yoga person. So we have to acknowledge that the power differential is there. And I talk about this in the multiple roles webinar. So you can always go for that. That was this webinar number 2 that's already posted on the SEI website. There is going to be an empower imbalance anyway, because you are the practitioner, the therapist, and they are the client. So I think that our own stories need to be used mindfully and briefly, and only when necessary. Right? Sometimes if I have had a similar experience, let's say a client is coming to see me because there was a death of a parent, and they were in the room and it was kind of triggering and traumatic for them. Okay, do I launch into my story about how I was with my dad when he died and how beautiful it was? Like, that may not be helpful. It may be helpful for that client to know that I also witnessed a parent's death, but I need to use that very judiciously at the right time, because the person who's paying for the session should get to tell their story and talk, not the therapist. Right? Like if I need to, talk about my own issues with my father dying, that's not going to, that should not happen in the session with my client. So it's this interesting thing about power in our therapeutic connection. We are responsible as the professional for what happens in the session. We're responsible for creating safety, for having all the pieces of the paperwork and everything in place. And we want to relate to our clients as human to human. That I am a person just like you are. We all have our challenges. And I want my clients to feel that we're a team and that we're working together and that I'm not above them, while I also have to feel, yes, I am still holding the responsibility for this session and I do have more power. And so it's this dance, right? And I've become more aware of that as a white therapist. I need to work with my power dynamics and my privilege in session in different ways, depending on the person that I'm working with, and be aware of those dynamics as well. And my experience may not relate if, the person is from a different culture, or, has a different background than me. And so I can't always assume that my story will be helpful. So I tend to use my own stories very sparingly. So, and yes, Cynthia is writing, and coming from a coaching perspective, I've decided to take it as a case by case. Yes, absolutely. Personally, I don't love how much the coaching industry uses their story to leverage connection with their clients. I think there's other ways to relate and connect. I know nothing about my SEP's personal story, and I've been with her for almost 9 years. We still have the most beautiful relationship with deep connection and safety. So beautiful. So yes. Again, mindful awareness. Will my saying something about my story, will this be helpful? Will it be therapeutically helpful, not just of interest? Because there are many clients that love to take care of their therapists. And like, oh, how's your mom doing now? And oh, how's your kids? And oh, and we can get sometimes a little comfortable and a little this. And again, that's, is that really therapeutic? I mean, and, there is a piece of ventral vagal connection where we are human beings together. and we talk about their kid maybe, and my kid, oh yeah, I remember that time in the preteen time, right? So it does need to be taken on a case-by-case basis, and your intention should always be, is this clinically therapeutic? Is this going to be helpful? Is this going to further their treatment, their therapy? Yeah, Nicole, gosh, there are so many layers to dance with. Absolutely super helpful. I coach with clients exploring psychedelic and non-ordinary states of consciousness with breath work. It is a new field. I'm thinking of Kylea Taylor, and who is this for question? I'm not sure who Kylea Taylor. So yes, so this, thank you, Nicole, for bringing this up. So when we offer experiential exercises for our clients to do, that can be a non-ordinary state of consciousness, right? And we need to keep very, very clear boundaries when someone is in a non-ordinary state, right? And so, especially if they're deep in process, right? A noise from the hallway can startle them, or a siren going by your window can startle them. So we need to be very, very clear. So Laura has, together through our core, but essentially separate. Yes, thinking about ourselves as containers. So I don't know if this is still taught. When I took my SE training, I remember Maggie and Peter talking about merge, join, and separate. So I don't know if that's still being taught or not. So these are kind of like 3 orientations that we can have with our clients. So when we are separate, we are really completely separate. It's more, very defined boundaries, very kind of clear logistical, that kind of thing. And trauma, as we know, is very alluring. That trauma vortex can really pull us in, right? And that's when we merge. Great, thank you, Bree. It's taught in Beginner 3, right? And we don't want to merge with our client's experience, because then we have lost the holding space of the container. And so the kind of the more optimal state is joining, right? Where I can feel my body, and my body is separate. And especially when they're doing an experiential exercise, I really come back into awareness of my body. Like I can feel my feet as they're starting to, experience their own sensations around their trauma. I'm noticing my breath. I really attune to not linking my breath pattern with theirs, right? Because if someone's in a sympathetic activation and they're starting to breathe quicker, I will sometimes catch myself breathing with them. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. No. Take a deep breath, lean back a little bit. Like I don't have to be so forward in their space. Like it's okay. And that my body posture, my grounding, my presence is the container. My tone of voice when they're in high activation is helpful. So merging is not. And so especially if you're doing any kind of, psychedelic therapy or non-ordinary states of consciousness with breath work, or with even just tracking sensations, that can be challenging for people, that can be non-ordinary for them. So this merge, join, separate is really, really important to know your own personal cues of when you're starting to merge, right, out of your care and compassion, and we get pulled in. Noticing when your client wants to merge with you, and sometimes clients want to know our stories because they like to merge with their therapist. And then you might need to do a little more separateness for a bit. Yes, so Kathleen saying, appreciate this a lot, and bringing it back to the question of whether what we share can be therapeutically beneficial or not for that person. I work with survivors of torture and have really learned the value of asking questions, permission before doing something, and being transparent about what happens in the room. Beautiful. Yeah. yeah, for someone with that severe level of trauma, having that, you're really giving choice, right? Going back to the 3 C's of safety: context, choice, and connection. So offering information, questions, permission before doing something is really part of that whole choice piece to create safety. Trauma can't be healed if the person doesn't feel safe, period. Right? That's why safety is job number 1. Okay, I'm going to jump back. These are beautiful comments, and continue. Okay. So I just pulled this off of the internet. How we advertise, how we talk about what we do. Like, this is a very generic, I mean, the picture is beautiful. This person is really in a beautiful experience. I can feel that from them. You know, it's outdoors, it's, you know, person looks very embodied. Anxiety reduction secret, you know, holistic therapy tips. There's a sensational quality in my perception to this particular picture. And so, again, how do we advertise? How do we, you know, what are people seeing about us? What kind of, so maybe this would be a fun chat kind of thing. So put some words in the chat when you see this picture of what impressions you have about whoever might be posting this. Right? I'm going to come off my share so I can see. So diversity, absolutely. Pretentious inclusivity, interesting. Yeah. Snake oil, yeah, like this is a one quick fix. Connecting with nature. What else? I thought snake oil too. Young, sexual, right? There's a little more vibe of that. Hive mind, right? I don't know what hive mind is. Jarring words, yep. Kitsch but alluring, fun, not too serious. I don't like the hook in the marketing. Yeah. Clickbait, yeah. Hipster, right? So this might appeal to a certain demographic, right? Maybe a certain age group. Exclamation point gives me urgency feel, which makes me question about their nervous system awareness. Yeah. An exclamation point, how that conveys the nervous system, right? Like, wow, insta therapy. Yeah, do these quick tips and your anxiety will be reduced, right? Yeah, wonderful. It's so great to have you write your impressions down, because we all come from different places and spaces. We're all different ages here on this webinar. We all have different ways of looking at things. So even the diversity angle was, you know, what was that first one? Pretentious inclusivity. that was interesting. So yeah, so, you know, do you say cure or eliminate or quick fixes or reduce your trauma now, or 10 easy steps to, you know, to feel safer in the world? And it's not as easy as that, you know. And so choose your images wisely, choose the language, choose your fonts and your exclamation points and your punctuation. Be mindful of punctuation, right? So I thought that a picture would connote these points much better than me just blabbing on about this. So, you know, and I know that I know for massage therapy in New Mexico, there are certain stipulations that you can't use certain words in your advertising, like cure or eliminate or heal. You know, you have to be careful of the languaging and the expectations that are established through your media, your digital, your website, all these things. It has to be very, very mindful. Okay, use of touch. So again, I chose this picture specifically because this is a very evocative touch experience. The client is very vulnerable. The therapist has their head right in the pelvis. They have their hands right in the groin and the abdomen. These are all points on the body that can hold a lot of traumatic charge. One would hope that there is permission given and permission continued to be asked for this kind of touch, right? This looks like a yoga therapy type session. Could be very helpful, right? Stretching that psoas and, making containment and connection to the abdomen, to the solar plexus. And it could be utterly terrorizing for some people. So SEI is in the process of creating a statement, kind of the ethics of touch statement, about SEI's intentions for how SE practitioners use touch and communicate touch, that it's never sexual, and that it's therapeutic, and that it's well communicated, and that there's choice, and that choice can be revoked at any point in time, and that kind of thing. So that is really, really, really critically important. And many clients that we see, harmful touch has been a huge part of their trauma. And so touch needs to be deeply respected. And I teach a lot of massage therapists, and I was a massage therapist for a long time. And with touch, you have direct access into their nervous system, right? We have all these sensory fibers right in the skin and with pressure. And so it can be a very powerful way to connect and support a client. And it can be utterly devastating to a client if touch is employed in a way that is not caring, mindful, conscious, and trauma informed. So with any kind of touch, like in Advanced 2, there are some touch techniques shared about how we can work with eyes, how we can support a client. There's some table techniques. If you want to incorporate more touch into your work, Kathy Kane's work is just fabulous. She has her own touch trainings. And before you embark on any touch, I would like all of us to have a signed consent for touch techniques, right? Because this will be, it makes the process of touching more intentional, right? In the sense that the consent should include your clinical reasoning why touch is important for this particular issue, to acknowledge that the client has a right of refusal, and that you as a therapist also have a right of refusal. If you feel like the touch isn't quite right, that you can also stop doing the touch work. You want to communicate with the client how they might tell you, verbally or non-verbally, that they want the touch to stop. Because verbal yes or no, it often is very difficult for clients that have been harmed through touch. You can say, oh, if this doesn't feel comfortable, just tell me and I'll stop. And they may not have had a voice in their trauma where their body boundaries were violated. So you cannot count on them being able to say, please stop, this is feeling uncomfortable, right? They may not even be able to do a hand signal. In that case, they're probably not ready for touch work, right? And so this can be explored and clarified, and you would say, you know what? Maybe this is too much too soon. You know that this is available from me if you should choose. Let's just drop that now for a while. Right? Notice if they're activated when you even begin to talk about touch. Right? And so clients will always give some nonverbal, if for example, let's say they're going through a huge discharge and you're feeling the intuition that you want to support them with your hand on the back. And you ask them while they're in their discharge, they may be crying or, trembling. Is it okay if I put my hand on your back? it's not really necessarily the right moment to ask because they're sort of in a non-ordinary deep processing. It may be really beneficial and helpful. It may be just the thing that helps heal it, and it may be triggering. So it's good to talk about this. So the SE consent form that I talked about earlier may include these touch questions, and where you can talk about it at some point and then just say, if I'm feeling like touch could be helpful, we will have this conversation again and see how you feel about it. So because I was a body worker for so long, when I touch a body, I can feel if that body doesn't want me there, right? It's like all of a sudden the energy gets withdrawn, or the muscles contract, or it feels empty, or, so not everyone has that kind of cueing because they haven't been trained. But there are lots of nonverbal cues of how the body curls, or you may be touching their back and their hand starts to go into a fist, and it's like, okay, something else is happening here, right? So pay attention to all the cues that you might be getting, their breathing, their body posture, little micro movements. And then be aware of any licensing regulations or malpractice regulations that may prohibit your use of touch. In many states, psychologists are not able to touch. Like, that's part of their regulations, that they don't do any touch work. So depend on that. Now, the interesting thing with touch is if you're doing a Zoom session, you can sometimes actually employ more touch, right? So you might say to the client, do you have a blanket that you can bring to the session? And let's get some containment in your process. What does it feel like to have the blanket around you, right? Can you put a hand on your heart or your belly, or, on your occiput and your chest for some stabilization? So self-touch by the client tends to be much safer, right? Because it's not another nervous system touching them. Okay, there's lots of chats here, so let me come off and see where we are. Okay. Okay, so is SE work generally a long-term prospect for the client? Should they be advised, referred out to shorter term? So in my experience of doing this for 20 years, SE is not short-term therapy. There may be some kind of trauma first aid skills that can be sort of a Band-Aid, but it's not really doing trauma work. But it may be to help them ground and reestablish some settling. That could be short term, right? That could be, maybe like if a child is going through a crisis and you're working with the family and you're giving some grounding skills for the parents so they can be more regulated when working with their kid and being with their kid. But yeah, I have found that SE work tends to be a longer term endeavor. Yeah, and Kathy Kain is Kain. She does have a website. Carolyn or Abby, do you know Kathy Kain's website? Maybe you can drop that into the chat. And then Andrea puts in, her colleague Sabrina teaches and trains on psychotherapeutic touch. And there's a link there, homebodytherapy.com podcast. So Janelle is sharing, I was part of another ethics presentation and the women taught us the client's 5 rights. Yes, no, pass, I don't know, stop. And if you can't say these things safely, you should leave. So I want to qualify. I mean, I think those are great. Yes, no, pass, I don't know, stop. Actually, many of my clients when they first come to see me, they don't have a voice, and they would not be able to verbalize those things, not because it wasn't safe, but because they haven't opened their voice yet, right? And so they feel good about me, or, but this is, usually I usually haven't had too much of a problem with this. Like if I say, let's just check in with your body. Are you willing to do a little experiential of just tracking some sensations? And I notice if there's any hesitation, like they go, well, and I go, oh, okay, so there's a little pause there. So maybe not now today, right? Or if they say, I'm not sure, I go, great. And then I'll say, how did you know that? Right? How did you know that you didn't want to do that today? And it becomes this beautiful exploration of them beginning to trust themselves and trust their voice, and me not shaming them for not wanting to do the exercise, and for me honoring their boundaries. And oh, it's just beautiful. So yeah, so it's great. You can post these 5 rights: yes, no, pass, I don't know, stop. Yeah, there's all sorts of tools that we can give cues to our clients, right? So that's a visual cue to have it posted. They could point to one if they don't have a voice to say it. So yeah. So Cynthia is sharing, I wouldn't have been able to verbalize any of those things when I first started due to the freeze. Yes. I often found myself stuck in situations with therapists or body workers that I couldn't communicate my way out of. If I had someone who understood SE back then, it would have been a game changer. Yes. Yes. And this is where we can re-traumatize clients by just this little language piece, or these boundary issues. I use this as a jumping off part to detoxify shame and guilt. Start from where you are. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So who would have thought that all of these things are folded into creating an ethical practice, right? It's a complex thing. So, okay, I'm looking at the time and I want to just make sure that I get through all of my slides. I think I'm near the end. So here's Lucy. So I really invite you, if you haven't heard the webinars on multiple roles or scope of practice, Lucy is in clear violation of both of these, right? So she's claiming that she's a psychiatrist and is a doctor, and she clearly does not have the credentials. So she's misrepresenting herself. She is practicing way out of the scope of her practice, and she's working on her friends, which is a dual or multiple role, right? Now, her intention may be good. Her advice is sometimes a little direct and critical, especially to Charlie Brown. In fact, I teach mindfulness as well, and Sharon Salzberg, who's a mindfulness teacher, she actually, she was working on her inner critic, and she realized that her inner critic was Lucy, and she named her Lucy. So, because of some of the statements that Lucy makes to Charlie Brown. So again, multiple roles and scope of practice are very important things to create an ethical practice. And they're very common mistakes. And so I cover these extensively in the webinars 2 and 3 on the SEI website. Okay, so we will make mistakes, right? Repairing mistakes, the rupture and repair cycle. I'm sure you know this all, but I just have it here. So we're human, right? And we will make mistakes. And healing and repairing these ruptures can be very therapeutic, right? Because for many of our clients will have relational trauma and developmental trauma where there was rupture, but no repair and attunement again. And so we are not perfect as therapists. And, the more that we can engage in this cycle, this rupture, repair, and reattune cycle, the more healing it can be. it can open up for clients like, not all humans are as awful as the humans that did this to me or that I grew up with, right? So it's important to acknowledge a mistake or a misunderstanding and apologize if needed, right? Oftentimes trauma was induced and no apologies were ever given. So that I just did that yesterday with a client, right? Ask if a client needs to share anything from their experience about what happened and listen deeply. And then you can communicate, you can have a mutual conversation about any actions you will take to avoid this in the future. You know, being mindful of things like one of the mistakes that I make, I have a non-binary client and I am still learning how to use my pronouns correctly, and I sometimes will slip up. And I'm getting better about catching myself in the moment and saying, oops, I'm sorry. And they are very forgiving of me. And that is helpful. But little things. So with this, so I'll come back off of my screen share. I am working right now with a new client who has some religious cult trauma. And I have a somewhat similar background from years ago. And at the end of our first session, we said goodbye and I put my hand on my chest, which is what I do. And she went like this. And then we clicked off. And so at the beginning of our second session yesterday, I did an apology. I said, this is what happened right at the end of the session. And I know you're trying to pull away from cult behaviors. And I know this was common in my group that I was in, that we do this. And I said, my putting my hand on my heart to say goodbye and to honor our session evoked this implicit behavioral response from you that you probably did not appreciate. She said, yeah, I didn't like that at all. And I said, well, I apologize. And I am going to try to be more mindful of not doing this when we close our session, because I know that now that might elicit that behavioral reaction from you. That's kind of habitual. And she was really thankful, right? She was really happy that I noticed it, that I stated it, that I apologized, that I brought it up, and that we could talk about it and we could move on. And then now our therapeutic connection is deeper because she now knows I'm paying attention, right? And not everything I'm going to do is, I might trigger her because I'm just a human being and I'm going to try to catch those things. And because she knows I'm caring and I'm willing to take responsibility for my actions, she can then call me out if need be. Just say, hey, when you did this one thing, this was triggering for me. So this is a really good, this rupture, repair, and reattune cycle is a beautiful healing for relational trauma, right? Because she felt seen by me. She felt heard, she felt seen, she felt acknowledged. I apologized, and we're all clear. So when will the recording of this webinar be available? I think in a couple of days. I think we need to give them 3 days to get this up and on the website. And there's the link, traumahealing.org/ethics. Okay, 1 week. I'll wait for a week to get it up on the website. Yes, the link is shown here for Charlotte. So there are now four ethics webinars that you can listen to over and over on the SEI website. The first one is sort of an introduction to our new code of ethics. That is just a conversation between me and a staff person at SEI, kind of just going over things. And then number 2 is about multiple roles. Webinar 3 is on scope of practice. And then today Webinar 4 is ethical practice. And just a note, right now, because the ethics code, like I said in the beginning, is it only covers trainings and workshops that SEI puts on. That's kind of the limit of the SEI Code of Ethics. So right now, it doesn't cover private practice. And if a client makes a complaint to SEI about a practitioner and it's a private practice complaint, SEI cannot work with that at this time. So there are, plans for the future of having a, like a practitioner, what's it called? Like a group where we, have an organization, professional organization. That's the word I'm looking for. Where we have an SEI practitioners organization, which will then have a code of ethics for people that are part of this membership group, professional group. So that's not yet happened. So at this point, private practice issues aren't covered through the code of ethics, but you don't want to have a client complaining about you, right? You don't want them going to your board or your professional organization. So that's that. And again, the link to the recording will be sent to anybody who registered. So if you're on today, you registered, and then you will get the recording of the link for this. And then I will send the PowerPoint to SEI, and then they can do with that what they want to get it to you. So Mary Catherine is saying, I'm an SEP and later became a body worker to offer SE Touch as a licensed practitioner in my state. I do work as about 6 hours a week as a massage therapist at a studio. I do not offer massage to SE clients in my private SE practice because I feel very strongly about this boundary. However, I really want to offer trauma-informed massage to separate clients. Do you do this work separate? But did you sign? So I had ended my massage career before I began my SE. And when I did employ touch with my SE clients, it was always clothes on and always with, consent and all that good stuff. So I agree. I would not mix, regular lotion massage with SE work. There's just too much going on, and it's it's just too much for both client and therapist to navigate all of that. So I didn't ever mix it either, but you could certainly offer your SE clients some trauma-informed touch in the context of your SE sessions, and maybe as a separate type of body work. But and yes, Sandra, I'm a second-year student right now. Can we decide not to use touch? Absolutely. Absolutely. You do not need to use touch at all. Isn't there a yoga technique based on trauma? Yeah, there is trauma-informed yoga. Bessel van der Kolk has used it for his veteran survivors. I don't know the name of the technique either, Laura. I'm sorry. So, yeah. So you really want to have that, just be impeccable and clear about your boundaries, what you offer to whom, and it's safe for you as a therapist and safe for your clients. So I think there's a couple of last slides here. Okay, so referrals are part of an ethical practice. So, if your client, let's say if you're a coach or a yoga person or a body worker and you notice that your client's not getting better, if they have changes in mood, if their daily functioning is decreasing, if they're not feeling better, any kind of sleep or eating disturbances, they need more help than you as a non-licensed practitioner can offer. So create referrals for everything. I have had to refer people to acupuncturists and to psychiatrists and to, movement therapists and all of that. So find your people in your space that are hopefully trauma-informed massage therapists, trauma-informed dentists, PTs that know how to titrate the weightlifting and all of that kind of stuff. So that can be really helpful. And, be clear about how you would deal if a client calls you with a crisis. Would you have a crisis number at hand to refer them to if they needed to talk to someone that's more trained? So the 988 number now, I think, is nationwide for mental health crises, 988, as opposed to 911. So I know that that is up and running in New Mexico. So 988 for that. Personal sustainability, I think, is part of an ethical practice. Trauma work is hard. You're holding space for a lot, and you're getting a lot of story information and cues and images that your client shares with you and emotion, and you will only be able to hold a safe space if you are resilient and grounded and doing therapy from your ventral vagal system. If you've worked on your own stuff, which we all have, you want to give yourself breaks. You want to not overload yourself with super duper challenging people. You want friends, you want laughter, you want stretching, you want walking, nature, music. I'm a knitter, I love to knit. All of these things is really important to know your resources and practice them, right? Embody what you teach and how you work. So for any more information, if you are licensed, you want to maybe review your code of ethics, especially about touch, understand your professional organization's code of ethics, have some form of malpractice, err on the side of doing less rather than more, right? Titration is such an important principle. So, if you're, know your scope of practice. If you're not skilled to work with the issues that are brought up, you have to refer them to other people. If you have some issues about the code or you want to reach out to the SEI legal department, here is their email, legal@traumahealing.org. If you have a question about anything. And then these are just some additional resources. So, SCORE is an organization where retired business people volunteer time to help new business people get up and running, and they can give you information about finances and, tax information, and, especially if you're a sole proprietor and do you have to do estimated taxes? And yes, you do. And, there's all sorts of logistical things that this organization, score.org, can help you with. There's the Small Business Administration, the Consumer Finance, and then accounting programs. I like to use Quicken. I find it much simpler than QuickBooks. There's all sorts of, people paying through websites now, and there's all sorts of things. There's Venmo, there's PayPal, and you just want to make sure that you have your business income separate than from your personal finances, because in case you're ever audited, they don't like to see it being mixed. And there we go. Ta-da. So let's see, Hannah, what's the standard number of clients to take on per day, per week as an SEP? So, oh boy, that's really individual. I mean, when I was doing body work, I was seeing 6 people a day. My optimal for me is 4, but financially you may not be able to do that. If you work at an agency, you might have to do 30 clients a week. It just depends on what the requirements are for your own financial needs or the agency that you happen to be working for. If you're working at an agency, you could maybe ask that they don't refer all their trauma people to you. So that you might have some other, maybe a parenting thing. But as we all know, trauma pervades just about any other thing. You know, if there's depression, anxiety, health, chronic health issues, pain, oftentimes trauma is at the heart of it. So Laura's also recommending Therapy Notes platform. It has everything plus billing for cheap. So that's great. Thank you. And Jen, yes, I am an improved provider through Advanced. I do personal sessions, and I can do consults up through the Advanced, but I don't do any kind of group consults. Yes, Ida Kona, opportunity to serve. Yes. So there are many volunteer opportunities. There's an ethics committee that you can volunteer on if this topic is delightful to you as it is to me. So you can reach out. There should be something on, Carolyn, is there something on the website about volunteering? So where they can go to volunteer. So good, Cheech. Yes, wonderful. So thank you all for your wonderful questions. I hope this was helpful for you. It seems like it from everything coming in. If you have an ethics question, you can reach out to me. Let's see, is it okay that I put my website in my email? Carolyn? Okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine. And then I don't know if we have I'm assuming we have an ethics committee. I'm not entirely sure. But you can email the legal team and ask if that's something that you'd like to participate in. And I'm sure they'd be able to help with that.
Yeah, there is an ethics committee. So that's my website and my email. And also, let me give one other link. So I am also a mindfulness teacher on the free meditation app called Insight Timer. And I have like over 20 different practices on there that are pre-recorded. It's a free meditation app. And I have a lot of the basic SE skills as meditations on Insight Timer. And it's great to give as homework for your clients. So I have orienting to the present moment, tracking sensations, how to do that, how to work with emotions like anger or anxiety, how to track that. I have the shifting focus where you notice the challenging sensation and then notice a neutral to positive. I have something on the window of tolerance. I have 4 meditations on the different parts of our polyvagal system. And so I did this because I wanted to be able to give, here's a link to a meditation that will help you with tracking sensations. They can have it on their phone, they can do it, and they know my voice if I'm their therapist. And so that is a really helpful resource that guides a person through, because I have found with clients that doing something once in a session, it requires so much more repetition for these resources and skills to get really embodied. That's another practice, is embodying your resources. You can send your clients there, you can do that. And yes, legal, the legal is, let me put that slide back up. The address for legal is legal@traumahealing.org. That would be if you want to volunteer or get on the ethics committee or talk about any stuff, legal@traumahealing.org for that information. All right, everyone. Great timing. Thank you for your presence here. Thank you for your intentions to be an ethical practitioner. This is so critically important for the work we do and for each other.